All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us here at M365 Philly. Hope you've been enjoying all of the exciting topics today. I know I've been learning quite a bit on each of these. Um, as you may already know, we've been recording the sessions all day. And if you have any questions, the Q&A has been a little iffy today, but please post them in the Q&A section and someone will publish them and we'll try to answer your questions as best we can. So joining us today, we have Aiden and Michael. They'll be walking us through the different ways .NET developers can extend the Power Platform. So welcome, guys. Glad to have you here, and you may begin when you're ready.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn off my camera here. Presenting. Yeah, so thank you for the introduction. I'd like to thank all the attendees for being here today, as well as the Jason and the whole team behind today's event. For anybody who's here, Q&A, we think it works, but go ahead and throw your questions up. If you have my phone number and you want to call me or text me with questions, let me know. I say whenever you get them, we'll be happy to cover them as they come. So today's session is the Power Platform for the .NET developer. I am Aiden Kaskela. I'm the president of Excellent Solutions, and day-to-day, I'm mostly a .NET developer. I've been working with the Power Platform and its predecessor technologies for 16 years. I'm a BizApps MVP and chapter leader at the DC Power Platform user group. We usually meet on the second Tuesday after work. So our next meeting is going to be January 14th. Please come by and check us out. It should be a really good time. All our meetings are virtual, but we're going to have quarterly in-person meetups. So hopefully we'll see you then.
Thanks, Aiden. Michael Ochs. My CV will look very similar to Aiden's because he and I have been working together for pretty much ever. So yeah, I have a similar background in Dynamics, Dataverse. I still have CDS on there. I guess I should have updated that one. That's an old slide. But yeah, I'm a .NET developer originally and fell into Dynamics and CRM and haven't looked back and been in the Power Platform ever since. So, yep.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. So today's agenda, first thing we're going to do is give a quick overview of what the Power Platform is and some of its components and benefits. Then we'll take a deeper dive into the Dataverse and how developers can extend it. And then Mike's going to show us custom connectors and how they enable no-cliffs development. So the Power Platform is a tightly integrated family of low-code development tools. And it allows everybody in your organizations to build applications and business solutions. So some people hear that, I know I did at the time when I first heard that, and it sounds like it takes away work from pro developers. But over time, I've come to realize that it's the opposite, and it really creates more opportunities for pro developers. And the reason why is because the Power Platform, it lets business users do some configuration and automation and frankly, build some really cool things without writing any code. It's awesome. But there's always going to be limitations to what that lets you do. And if configuration was as flexible and powerful as writing code, it wouldn't really be configuration anymore. It would be writing code. So Microsoft addresses this by describing the tools as having no cliffs. So your users, your business users, can configure a bunch of stuff, but eventually, they'll likely hit a limit of what they can do. And that creates an opportunity for pro devs to come in and solve the problems. So in my opinion, these low-code platforms have enabled greater opportunities for, say, coders than you would expect. So the components of the Power Platform, I'm going to start at the bottom of the slide. This is where we're going to spend most of our time actually talking today. The data connectors, these are the integration points out to other systems. They're really key to the Power Platform because they let us escape the application silos that we've had for forever. They really enable easy integrations out to easy connections out to other systems. There are thousands of connectors, things like SQL, Slack, Twitter, FTP servers, and Mike's going to get pretty deep into those. The AI Builder is built on Azure Cognitive Services, and it's a low-code way to use AI in your apps. So it has things like form recognizer, there are object detection models, and really neat things. Dataverse is the native data store for the Power Platform, and that's where I will be spending most of my time talking today. So those are kind of some of the building blocks. And above that, in the middle row, sit the kind of what would traditionally be like a product. So Power BI, you probably know that. That's the analytics tool. You can use Power BI and connect out to a bunch of services and pull in your data and look at them. Power Apps is an app development platform. So it lets you build apps that runs on mobile, tablet, and desktop. And it's kind of like PowerPoint meets Excel, the way that you build it. Power Automate is an automation engine. If you don't know that name, you probably know Azure Logic Apps. So Power Automate is built on Logic Apps, but it's focused for the end users as opposed to the IT department. So I use this all the time for notifications to myself. An example I like to give is, if I can set up one of these processes so it waits for an email to come in. And if the email is from my boss and it's marked as high priority and it's after 6 p.m., then send me a text message so I can get it. That's kind of a silly example, but I use these flows all the time for my business and personally too. Power Virtual Agents is chatbots. These are actually really cool because you can put them on your website, but you can also put them in Teams, and you can put them in lots of places. And they interact with your data, but it creates a kind of a self-service option for not only for your customers, but for your internal users as well. So you can automate a lot of your processes that way. And then Power Pages is the external facing website, so your customers can authenticate and interact with their data in the Dataverse. So things like support tickets, order history, things like that. Power Pages is a really easy way that is natively integrated with Dataverse to surface that for your users. So when you kind of combine these things, all of these products use the connectors. They pull data from the Dataverse. You can tie it into the AI Builder, and it really, really gets powerful. So when you put them together, it's kind of more like, this reference is getting a little dated at this point, but it's more like the Infinity Gauntlet, where when you combine them, they're all better together. So I'm going to give a deep dive into the Dataverse and extending that as a developer. So the Dataverse is the place where you store data in the Power Platform. At its core, it's a SQL database. But there are reasons that you would use this instead of just creating a SQL database. One of the big reasons, so I listed 3 big reasons. First, it abstracts out all the parts of database management that developers don't want to deal with. Schema changes, it's simple to create new tables and columns. The presentation layer is it's Power Apps to present this data. That's all configurable, it's built in. Again, really easy, and we're going to take a look at that. Security, skipped over the API. There's an API that lets you work with the Dataverse programmatically, so you can perform actions, you can do all your CRUD operations, things that you would expect to do with a database. You can do that through the API. And security is a really big one. It's really simple to configure security at the table level for rows or even for specific columns across rows in a table. What this does is it allows or ensures that your users can only see and modify the data they need to. So it reduces risk around having too much access to your data, or even inadvertent things like Bob from down the hall accidentally bulk deleted everything. Well, we can change the security rules to limit what Bob is able to do or the types of records he's able to work with. And the thing that's awesome about the security is that it's baked in and it covers all the access points. So if Bob is running a program that tries to do something and it's running as his user, it will prevent him from doing that. So it spans the API and Power Apps. So it's really, it's a really robust security model. Besides that abstraction, one of the things I've spent a lot of time doing is writing plugins. And these are kind of analogous to database triggers. So you can write some code based on an event in the database, but it runs an execution pipeline. So it lets you do things like manipulate a record or perform validation before it actually gets to the database. So you can also perform actions after a record is created or updated. So this is one way to build your automation. So let's say you have let's say you have two custom tables, one for invoices and one for payments. And the payment has a foreign key out to the invoice. So you might have a plugin that runs, and when a payment is created, that finds the related invoice and recalculates the invoice total. And then if the balance is, let's say the balance is 0, it'll mark the invoice as paid, send out an email to the customer, notify the warehouse, kind of whatever it is that you want it to do. You can do all that in plugins. Now, a lot of automation can be done either in plugins or logic apps or Power Automate. You can send messages out to Azure Service Bus and process them there. But some things can only be done in the plugins because plugins run in the actual execution pipeline. So they can be performed synchronously, and they're typically significantly faster than using an external service. They also execute transactionally. So if you have 10 things that need to be done, either all or nothing, really the best way to do that is in a plugin. Finally, final benefit is that you can build custom APIs and have them reside in Dataverse. So we're going to take a look at that. And what a custom API is it lets you define some input parameters and output parameters and expose them as actions through the API. And behind that is a custom .NET class that you write. So you're able to execute an action against the API, call your code, do some stuff, and return values back to the caller. So it's a great way to solve a couple of problems, or enable you to do a few things, rather. You can reuse logic by putting your code in an API. Then you can call that API from JavaScript on a form. You can call it from Power Automate. You can call it from a plugin. So reusability. I'm more comfortable as a .NET developer than JavaScript. So if there's something crazy complex, it might be better for me to write it in C# and put it behind an API, and then I can call it from my JavaScript. But it also runs server side. So if you're performing sensitive actions, like let's say you have to go out to the Key Vault, get some values, integrate with another service, blah, blah, blah. If you want to perform those actions from JavaScript, you don't want to expose those sensitive information to the user. So the user can make the request, and all of that actions where it gets the password and everything like that happens server side. So the user is kind of unaware of it. So for security consideration, it can be a good way to do things as well. So I'm going to be talking about a couple of these specifically, and yeah, let's get demoing. So the first thing I'm going to start with the schema, then we'll show some plugins and custom API, then hand it over to Mike for the custom connectors. So this is the maker screen. This is a solution, which is a way to move your components from one environment to another. So I already have a couple of things in here, but let's what we're going to do today is create a new table to track questions that come in from the 365 Philly event. So to do this in a database, typically, right, if you want to expose it, you would generate your table, update your presentation layer, add it to your API, and on and on. So we're going to do all that right now. So we can create a new table. So the terminology has changed over the past year or two to kind of follow the standard SQL naming conventions. But we'll call this M365 question. There's kind of advanced options, but we're just going to let it ride as it is. This will just take a few seconds. And as it starts to create that table, it will let us add new columns and modify it while it's doing things in the database behind the scenes. So we have options for the forms and views, columns and relationships. So we'll keep this pretty simple. We'll say what the question is. Make that a big old text field. Text area. And we'll add another field for if it's been answered or not. And we'll also add a column for the person who asked it. Been answered. Make this a choice. So we can say yes or no. I think I'll go with a choice. And you can create your own or use existing options. I think I'm just going to go with a yes or no. So two simple columns and a relationship. So, in SQL terms, this would be a foreign key from our question table out to the contact table. So to set that up in Dataverse, we can just do new relationship. We can define the schema name. It adds some other information about if it should be required, what it should look like on the other side, descriptions and all that. But that action creates our relationship now. So we have our fields for our contact and question. So our schema is updated. Now we need to change the presentation for it. So every table has at least one form, and this is how we display details about that row, how we display that to the user. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Change the formatting, change our section name. And we can add our fields out to the form. See if I can make this bigger. Go. Big old question and the contact who asked it. So this is, again, this is our question form. We'll save and publish that. And then while that's going, we need a way to expose this to our users. So we have a number of apps already. I'll show an existing one and then how quickly we can make a new one. So this is a built-in demo app for fundraising. We have our left navigation. They can be dashboards, they can be standalone pages, or they can be views, which is basically a table, a subset of rows in a table. Then you drill into it and it opens a form. So if we want to create a new app for our Philly questions, the reason that you would create a new app typically is because we have one database, but if you think about how they're used out in the wild, you have, for a big company, you might have a sales team, you have support, you have accounting and marketing. All of that data could be in the Dataverse together. but not everybody needs access to all of that data, and really not everybody cares about all that data. So support shouldn't need to see accounting. They might need to see invoices. What you can do is create multiple apps kind of based on role and expose only what's most relevant. So we just created our 365 Philly app. We'll create a new page and we'll go with a table. Select an existing table. We're going to show contacts. Puts it in our navigation. Show accounts as well. And we'll show our new questions. So by default, it has a basic view. We can change this to show the columns that are interested, that we're interested in. Things like when it was created, if it's been answered, who asked it. We're just going to keep the basics one on here now. So we've created our app, save, publish. And this is a Power App. What we're going to be seeing. This is the type of Power App. It's called a model-driven app. So it's basically forms on top of our database. So we can look at our contacts, we can look at our accounts, and then we can see all of the questions that have been asked. So if I want to create a new question, you can fill in the contact for it. I'll say that was Aiden. And save it. So now we have our record. So pretty quickly, and I think under 8 minutes, we're able to create new tables in our database, add new columns. The security is built in, so we don't have to do that. And we've created that presentation layer where, based on people's permissions, they can go in and start working, see this app and work with this data. So now our 365 Philly app is listed in our apps. And I can choose which kind of user roles. I'm not going to get into security, but I can say, people with the Q&A maker role should be able to see this. So kind of a really, really quick example of how we're able to extend, just the platform. From a code sense, developers are able to interact with this through an SDK. And what we're looking at now is the standard .NET Framework SDK. This has been around forever, since the old CRM days. There's a new version. I think it's on .NET it's on .NET Core 3.1. It's been rebranded as the Power Platform. But this example is using the old CRM kind of full framework model. To connect to a Dataverse instance is really simple. You can use your username and password. I prefer using app registrations. So you get a client ID and a secret. I'm not going to go through it, but we could set up a new app registration in probably under a minute, where we get our users. So we can say, here's my org, here's my ID and secret. And that creates a client. And this is all based on request and response. So if you want to retrieve a record, there are shortcuts for some actions. Ultimately, a retrieve is a retrieve request. So simple things like create, retrieve, update, delete. Those are all really simple to do, where you just say basically your table and the ID for that record. And there are a lot of tools out there that will that'll make this easier to work with and kind of generate, auto-generate strongly typed classes over your tables, so you don't have to work with it in this style. But I kind of want to show kind of the bare bones of what's going on. But after you set up your client and you're able to connect, you're able to work with the API pretty easily. It's not always intuitive, but for the most part it is, where if you want to retrieve a record, you tell it what you want to retrieve. So I'll show that. I let that run for a second. So in this case, I'm getting back a specific contact, and I'm saying, give me all the columns. From there, I'm going to get the first name attribute and write it out to the console. And it's Aiden. Doing things like creates are almost as easy. You tell it that you are creating a new entity object. You specify the properties that you want to fill. Create that record. Gives you an ID back. And we have our ID. So pretty easy way to get in there and start creating records against our new schema. So one thing I want to show now is this table that we just created. We're going to go in and work with it through the API. Well, I think we're getting a little tight on time, but if we were to do that, it would be essentially creating a new entity, populating our attributes, and then creating the only thing that would really be different is creating that foreign key reference to the contact. But all pretty straightforward. When we're retrieving data, instead of doing a select, we have to write a query, some type of query expression. There are multiple types that you can pass in. But here we'll say, give me all the contacts named Robert. And again, just a request, and we get the response back. In this case, we have 2 contacts. So if we wanted to do things that we could go in and update our contacts. So pretty easy, pretty easy stuff how to interact with it. So this would let you write integrations, schedule, external processes where you need to sync data, things like that. What I want to take a look at is the automation now, plugin automation. And I have a simple plugin set up. I've already created this, where the plugin class, it implements iPlugin, and there's just one method, the execute. From that parameter, you're able to get hooks back to you can get hooks back to Dynamics as the caller. It also lets you do things like tracing and stuff like that. So I have 2 examples of plugins here. The first one's a common case. This runs on create, and it happens in a pre-contact. So basically grabbing a record on the way to the database. So we're looking at the target is basically the record that's being sent to the database. I'm saying if it has a phone, pull that input value, strip out everything that's not a number, and if the length is 10, then format it as 3-3-4. And then after the record, after this contact is created, after the contact's created, then we'll create a new entity that's a task. It's going to be looking up to the contact, and it'll say, call this person. So I've already registered that. I'm not going to show this in detail, but you have your different plugin classes, and through the plugin registration tool, you're able to tie a specific event, like contact, create, and the stage, which is either pre or post. You're able to say, before a contact is updated, execute this class, and that's what's happening here. So if we drill into the contact that we just created, I think it was M365 Philly. All right, so we have our contact here. We can open up our record, and phone number has been formatted. If we look at our code, it was just the number, so we gave it a standard format, and then we also created a task for me to call this person. So kind of a trivial example, but it does show kind of how I say straightforward, because plugins are kind of weird to develop against. There's a lot of gotchas, but it's not a huge barrier to get in and start doing some simple validation and processes to make your data more uniform. There are a lot of ways to implement the same sort of thing, like the example of creating a task for a person. You could do that in Power Automate. You could do that in Logic apps. You could do it, 100 different ways. So there are things where you'd want, where you get the benefits of having it performed instantly and synchronously and as part of a transaction, where you might want to do it though. So that was the general SDK, and then kind of using that in plugins. The custom API is cool. This is one of my favorite things. It's a special type of plugin, and I said earlier, you can define some input parameters and output parameters, and your code figures out what to do with them. So I created one ahead of time because it's a little tedious. One second here. So when you create your custom API, I created one. It's called Retrieve Customer by Email. And the idea here is that you can have an email that is tied to a person, or it's tied to a company, or it could be a lead, or a random support request that you got on your website, or 100 other things. So you say that you want to get the thing that originated, where that email originated. So if this is something that you need to do in different places, each one of those would have to check, is there a contact with the email? Is there an account with the email? And on and on. But we're able to combine all that data into a single, or combine that logic into a single request, and just call the API instead. So we can give our custom API a unique name, so retrieve customer by email, and point it to a specific plugin that we have registered in our system. What that plugin does, and then under that, we have our part of our request. We have a field for email and a field for the responses. We're going to say, what's the ID of the record and what's the type of the record? And this, you can see I created it earlier today, created these about 3 hours ago. It probably took 10 minutes to get this custom API stood up from nothing to configured and developed. But inside our plugin code for that API, we're able to, we have access to our input parameters and perform whatever complex logic we want. And this could be integrations out to another system, things like that. Here, pretty simple case. It's a query against contact. And if there's a result for that email, then return the contact details. Otherwise, return the account details. We could have, we could also do things like if if there's not a contact and not an account, create a new contact or create a lead, with this email address, and then we'd be able to find it next time, things like that. So you can get as complex as you want in here. What's really great about it, though, is when you are calling it, the caller obviously doesn't have to know how any of that stuff works under the hood. All they need to know is, what do you have to pass in? What do you get out of it? So the way that you'd call a custom action is through an organization request. And again, everything is request and response based. And you just have to define your input parameters, and that's what you do. You can pull the output parameters off the response. So if we execute this and our email is contact example, that should give us this contact. And it does contact with that ID. And now if we do it for our account example, then we should get our account back as well. So the custom APIs, I already said their benefits, but one of the really, really cool things is that you're able to call these from Power Automate. So Power Automate has a connector to Dataverse. One of those is perform an action, either bound or unbound action. But it will show the retrieve customer by email as a type of action. I'll pull that up. It'll just take me a moment. Mike, I know you're eager to get started. Just indulge me for one moment.
Yeah, this is good. I'm enjoying you demoing.
So I'm going to create a new instant Cloudflow. And this could be something like, we'll just skip this. Could be something like when a a new email comes in, then retrieve the contact and do some information, but we'll just keep this simple. So using our Dataverse connector, we will perform an unbound action. Unbound is that it does not run on a specific record. Bound is like, you have to give it a contact to run on, for example. And it's right here, our AFK retrieve customer by email. So the API is so fantastic that not only are you able to write code against it, but it surfaces it in Power Automate as well. So I think the code that we used was contact example. And we'll pull up the first name. Or sorry, I think that's the contact ID. But it's even aware of what the values are, or what the parameters are. So when you run it, in Flow, you don't need to know anything about the code. You don't need to know anything about the custom API. It kind of guides you through it. So it's really a fantastic way to abstract out a lot. And you can call this in JavaScript from your form. So when a record opens, you can call this action. We showed it from code and now from Power Automate. So it really centralizes your logic. And the more complex it is, the more valuable this becomes. And we got our contact. So yeah, so that's custom APIs. Mike, thanks for indulging me.
Cool.
Please,
Awesome.
Please take it away.
Yeah. Well, I only had one slide. I'm just going to skip over the slide. So we're gonna talk about is the no cliffs portion of custom connectors, and custom connectors in general are very powerful. Custom connectors allow you to build your own connector within the Power Platform system, and obviously, as Aiden had mentioned previously, there's hundreds of out-of-the-box connectors, but there are use cases for creating your own. One of those use cases may be that you have an API that's internal, to your company, and you want to, be able to allow makers in the Power Platform to use that data and in their apps and in their flows. So we're going to basically go over 3 scenarios if we have time to go through all 3 of them. We're going to talk about just a standard custom connector that reaches out to an existing API. Then we're going to move into how we can create Azure functions in Azure. and connect those into a custom connector so that we can perform actions, or we can retrieve data, or whatever it may be that you want to put into your Azure function that is specific to your app or to your flow that you need to be able to use code first functionality that you can't necessarily do out of the box. And then the third thing we're going to look at, similar concept, but in this case, not using Azure Functions or custom Azure Functions that you host, but using custom code directly in a custom connector, which is a new feature. It's still in preview, but it sort of abstracts away a lot of what you would previously have to do in that second scenario, which is host your own Azure Function app and create your own functions and things like that. Now you can kind of drop code directly into a custom connector and have it execute for you. So to get started, I've got an existing API. This is a publicly available API that I like to use. It's catfact.ninja. If you run this API, it will bring you back a new cat fact, and it'll tell you, basically, if you wanted to get this in your inbox once a day, we can create a custom connector to Flow to actually do that. So I'm going to go over to, and I don't want to go here. Let's get out of here. So I'm going to go over into the Maker portal. I'm going to go to my custom connectors solution that I've already created, and I'm going to create a new custom connector. And I'll move Aiden's face out of there. All right, so the first thing I need is a host, right? And our host in this case is catfact.ninja, right? There's multiple APIs on that catfact.ninja endpoint. We're going to look at the fact one, but I think there's a facts as well that'll bring back like a list of facts. Yeah, it'll bring back a couple of facts. We're going to use the fact endpoint for this custom connector. So there's our catfact.ninja host. I'm going to skip over security. We're not going to necessarily go into security. This is an open API, so there is no authentication required for it, but you do have the ability to use OAuth, basic authentication and things like that as well. And that's a little bit a topic for another day, I think. All right, so we'll go to our definition. And this is sort of the manual process. I'll show you more of the automated sort of import a Postman collection in order to create this when we get to the Azure function part. But this is the operation ID is fact. We can enter a summary and a description so that people know what that's for. And then we're going to import from a sample. So this is a get. This is the URL. That's not the URL. This is the URL. And select import. All right, so there we are. We've got our request. It doesn't take any parameters or anything like that. It's just a call directly to that endpoint. And then we need a response. So we have to shape what the response looks like so that we know when we use it in our flow, when we use it in our Canvas app, that the specific shape of that response. So I'm going to add a default response. It looks like this. And import that. All right, there it is. We got the fact and the length of the fact. And at this point, we can just create our connector, except I need to give it a name. So this is catfact. Catfact. Let's go ahead and create it. And again, the idea here is that in the same way that you can create, custom connectors for your specific API that you don't necessarily want to share with other people, you can also create custom connectors and submit them to the connector library. So if you do have a API that you want your customers to be able to use as well, you can actually submit connectors for those APIs with Microsoft, and they go through an approval process and they'll end up getting published into the connector library. All right, so we had to create a connection. We're going to test this, make sure we get a cat fact back. We did. A group of cats is called a clouder. I did not realize that. Awesome. All right, so I like this. I like this so much that I'm going to set up a flow for it, and I'm going to email myself once a day with new cat facts. So go to automation. Cloudflow, we'll say it's scheduled to send me catfact. And we'll set it to 1 day. I don't think once a minute is a good idea. All right, there. So our recurrence is there. I'm going to add a new step. If I click on custom, I'll see my catfact custom connector that we just created. Creates a connection for it, and then the only thing I got to do is send an email to myself. Sure. All right. And cat fact of the day. And I'm just going to dump in the fact that I got back from this previous step. Let's go ahead and save that. And let's test it. It's good. Flow ran successfully. And here we are. So I've got, just like that, in the matter of, what is it, like 5 minutes, I've created a, an integration with an external API, and I've, emailed myself a cat fact, and it will continue to email me on a regular basis. So pretty straightforward, right? Like easy. I mean, easy, so easy compared to, the amount of code that you would have to write as a .NET developer to do the same thing. Like obviously it's a bit contrived of a demo, but it does show the power of how quickly you can get up and running with custom connectors in the Power Platform, and kind of abstract away, and your makers who may not be coders can reuse this connector in their environment, and and do the same thing that we just did there. So pretty powerful stuff. But at this point, we haven't looked at any code. So as this is a code-focused, code-first focused session, we're going to jump into the Azure portal. We're going to create an Azure function, and this Azure function is going to be a little bit contrived. It's actually not, though. It's kind of useful because there's things that you can't do in the Power Platform that you may want, that you would think that you could do out of the box. So in this example, it's going to be creating an Azure function that does regular expression validation, something you can't do in Flow today. You can do it in Power Apps and Canvas apps, but for whatever reason, that's been a gap in the Flow for a while. And if I want to validate an email address, using a regular expression as opposed to trying to break it apart and look at all the parts of that email address, this is a possibility. And then I could distribute that out, as I said, to other makers in my environment, and they could use it for their specific process, validating telephone numbers, addresses, whatever it may be. All right, so here we are in the Azure portal, and I've got my function app already set up. I'm just going to create a new function. And I'm going to develop in the portal. That's fine. This is going to be an HTTP trigger. And we'll say validate regex. And we'll just keep the authorization level at the function level. We could also set this to anonymous or admin, but we're just going to keep it at the function level, which just generates or asks for a code as a request parameter. All right, and we've got our function, and we're ready to start coding our function. I'm not going to make you guys watch me type out code for this, but it kind of gets you started. The Azure function gets you started to kind of get an idea of how this would work. And I'm just going to overwrite all of this with my regular expression validator. So this is going to be a GET request. We're going to pass in a value. We're going to pass in a pattern on that request. And then we're going to validate that using .NET regular expression library to validate that the value matches the pattern that we passed in. Go ahead and test and run this. This is a get. We need a couple of parameters here. So I'm going to put in value as one of the parameters. And in our case, it looks like that's lowercase. So this needs to be lowercase v. And we want it to be test at test.test. And then our pattern, which is just a regular expression pattern that you can look up on the internet to validate any string of characters. And that should be it. So we'll go ahead and run this. And we'll get a result back as to whether this is valid against the regex or it's not. Oh, I didn't save it. That's why. Let me save this. So that was the original code that was in there. Okay, result true. So that's good. We can also do, if we get rid of the dot there and run this, it's going to give us a result of false. Yep. So good. All right. So let's go ahead and we'll get the function URL for this. Let's open up Postman, and I'm going to create a new HTTP request. There is my URL for the request. Again, we need a value. And we need a pattern. Looks good. We're getting a result of false here. This actually needs to be encoded in Postman. So let me just real quick, if I can bring that up, we'll see what that looks like. Boom. Yeah, Postman wants that to be encoded for some reason. So when we get to the custom connector, it doesn't have to be encoded, but in this case it does. So now send result is true. So that looks good. And this will result in false. All right, cool. So I'm going to go back and got lost here for 1 second. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this. I'm actually going to put in the unencoded regex pattern because then it'll import nicely. And I'm going to save this. And I'm going to put it in a new collection. 365. Great. There we go. Save it into there. And now I've got Philly 65 here with my my Postman request. And I can export this. We'll export it as a 2.1 collection. Go to the desktop. There it is, Philly 365 Postman collection. Save it. And now we're ready to go ahead and run our Azure function through a custom connector. So coming back to, I can find the window I want in all of these windows. Sorry, here we go. Okay. All right, so we're going to create a new custom connector. Go to solutions, here it is. And in this case, we're not going to create it manually. We're going to create it using that collection that we just exported. So this is validate regular expression. And, oh, I did want to, hold on a second. Let me try that again. New automation custom connector. I thought it would give me the option to, let me see if I create it outside of the solution, if that makes a difference. Let's go custom connectors, new, here we go. All right, so we want to import from a Postman collection. Regex validator. All right, continue. That's already set up our host for us based on the URL that was in that collection. The one thing it does do when you use and this operation ID is obviously not ideal. We'll just call that validate. The one thing it will do when you import from a Postman collection using the specific type of authentication we were using for our function is it mangles the code by default. So this one's a little tricky, but basically there should be two equals equals on the end of this, and it kind of strips it out. So just a heads up there. Obviously, you know, I'm not sure why it does that, but it does. So we just need to go in and set that back. We'll create our connector. Yeah, because if we look at our Postman collection, you'll see that it has that equal equal at the end, but stripped it out when it came in. All right, so not an ideal summary or description. We'll leave that for now. And we'll create a new connection here. That gets a little wonky. It drops you on this screen. So we got to go back. And here it is. And go to test again. And all right, so that looks good, right? That's our default value. You may not want that in there as the default value. You might want to remove that. But anyway, for our test, that's fine. And we'll test the operation. And we get a result of false, which is expected because there's no dot there. And here we get a result of true. So that's essentially creating a custom connector calling out to an Azure function. The last thing I'm going to show, I already have it set up, so that's good. Thank you, Aiden. He actually created this demo connector previously. So this is using the code preview. And rather than us or you creating your own Azure function out in Azure and hosting that, this effectively does the same thing. Behind the scenes, Microsoft is taking this C# code and creating an Azure function for you so that you don't have to create it, but you can do exactly the same thing that we just did using the Azure function in code directly in the custom connector. And this code is, as of recently, actually ships along with the solution. So if you're doing ALM, right, and you want to unpack everything into a repo, this code will be in that repo, and when it gets deployed, that code will be in your target environment. So there are some limitations here. You can only, I think it's a maximum execution of 5 seconds. You know, you can't have more than a meg of code in there. So there are some limitations, but if you want to do something really quickly, you know, like this sort of regex or reverse text functionality, you can absolutely do it using the code preview directly in the custom connector. And I created a little app over here that's calling that demo connector that we were looking at here. So we can see that in action, right? I can say Philly M365, and if I want to reverse it, there it goes. It reversed my string for me. Same idea here. I want to validate my email addresses and get back a value, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of options with custom connectors, and obviously they're very powerful. We just went through 3 scenarios that I can't imagine having to have implemented. You know, we created an app, we created a flow, you know, and we reached out to 2 different APIs, and we did that all in the span of like 15 minutes, which is very powerful. And I think you know, it just speaks to the abilities, capabilities that are in the Power Platform that are you know, coming available and how they can be used. So with that, we're at time, and Aiden, if you have anything to wrap up with.
No. Do you just want to throw up our slide in case anybody wants to reach out?
I don't have the slide deck open over here. Sorry, I apologize.
Sorry, no problem. Well, we're available. I'm planning to be around for a little bit after this, but you can find us on Twitter. I'm at Aiden Kaskela.
There it is. I found it. It's not in presentation mode, but there you go.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right.